Good morning. Okay, grab a seat, please. Let's get started. Okay. All right. Very good. All right, so when you talk about the history of a church, it's kind of like, is he going to talk about how, the good old days were so much better than now, things like that. And I'm not going to say that because it's not true. In fact, these days are a lot better than they were, especially in the first 3 years. I remember one charter member family told me years later after we first started, she said, in fact, it was Judy Chambers, she said, yeah, when we first started meeting, I was wondering each week if anybody was going to show up. So it was real touch and go there. The first, I would say, 3 years of the church, because we had some setbacks and so on. So we're not going to just talk about the good old days, but there's a place to talk about your history, because it kind of like shows where you came from and how you got started, whether it's positive or negative or mixed bag. And for us, it was positive and negative as well. And so, we started from a church split situation. And so you can't say it was all positive. But I do know that there were 3 professors from Dallas Seminary who investigated the situation, and there were some folks who wanted to start another church. And so those three professors, after examining the situation, they said, oh, well, okay, we're willing to put our blessing on the new church. And I think that blessing was really important to us, very foundational, because those three men were objective. They didn't have a dog in the hunt. They weren't on either side of the situation from the church that we came from. And so they were objective, and they put their blessing on it after learning about the reasons for the split and so on. So at any rate, there was a group of people that were meeting on Sunday nights, kind of in a prayer group, and Carolyn and I went to just a couple of them. There were a group of people who were like really disheartened over what was happening at the church where we came from. And they spent a lot of time in prayer and discussion about what to do. And then finally, when our originating church, the elders there did not want to draw people back because people in small groups or individuals or families would go and talk to the elders, and they said they got the sense that they were saying, okay, you can just leave, we don't want to deal with this situation anymore. So after that happened, that's when the seminary professors said, okay, we're willing to put our blessing on the church because you guys have done your due diligence in going to talk to the leaders of that other church. So then, those people who were meeting on Sunday nights for a few weeks, they kind of became the nucleus of that group to start a church. So we, on March 18th, I got a phone call and said, hey, would you be the interim co-pastor of the church? I was like, wow, that's a real stable title. It's like, okay, you're interim. That means that there's no guarantee that you're going to be the pastor the next week. And you're a co-pastor, meaning you have to share responsibilities with someone else. And so I was like, oh, great. Okay, well, I was preaching at a church in Fort Worth, and they offered me the position there. And there were those were probably three of the worst sermons that were ever preached in America. And they offered me the job anyway. So I knew these people were really desperate. And so we didn't want to join in with them if they would ask me to be pastor. Why would I want to go to that church? No. But then the people from this new church, they said, hey, would you help out and get things started? So this other fellow and I said, okay, we will help out and be interim co-pastors. So our first church worship service was held at the Grapevine Civic Center on March 29th, 1993. And so this building still exists today, but it's not the convention center. This was years before the convention center was built. This was just a little storefront, and I think it's like a candle shop now or something like that on Grapevine. And so that's where we met. And I remember I preached from Philippians chapter 3, and we did communion, and this was Palm Sunday. And I think we had over 100 people there. There were a lot of people who I think were just curious about what was going on. They weren't definitely not, committed to starting a church. They were just curious about what was going on. So we had a pretty good group there at first. And then we met at the Keller Senior Citizen Center, which is not the Senior Citizen Center anymore. Last year they built a new one. And now I think this is a library annex, this small building. We met several times there at the Keller, what was the Keller Senior Citizen Center. And then we met at our third meeting place, which was Lucas Funeral Home. We're talking about morbid. I mean, so they had this little funeral chapel, and I remember the walls were made of like cloth. And so Lois White, she was our piano player. In fact, they're here today. They'll be in the second service. They live up in Oklahoma, Dan and Lois. And Lois was like banging on the piano, and it was like, and we were singing at the top of our lungs, but it sounded all mute, because they had this padded cloth on the walls of the little chapel to blunt out people crying during a funeral, And so they let us meet there for free, and people were dying to get in there. Yeah. But we had stiff competition. Yeah. So, thank you. So, they were very gracious in letting us use this place for free for about 7 months. And in the staterooms, we were allowed to use those for Sunday school rooms, which was great. And I remember some of the ladies, they had this one showroom where they had all the caskets, and the ladies would use the caskets as changing tables. So we were essentially a group of ghouls, meeting here. And I remember, this is before the internet, of course, and so there were about two times in that 7-month period where I got a phone call from the funeral director, and he said, "Oh, John, we're having a funeral tomorrow on Sunday, so you can't use the Sunday school rooms. You can't use the state rooms because there's a dead body in there." It's like, okay. So we did a phone tree. We called everybody up. Just worship service tomorrow, no Sunday school. And so that went on for about 7 months. And then we got a really big break. I remember us meeting to say, okay, where should this church wind up? And no one lived in Keller, including Carol and I. We lived in Flower Mound at the time. And no one lived in Keller. And so we looked at a map and we said, okay, Denton Bible Church is in Denton. And then Christ Chapel is in Fort Worth. And there's no Bible churches in between. So I remember one guy putting his finger on a map, and he said, okay, there's Keller. How about there? And we all said, yeah, that sounds like a good idea. Let's do Keller. So then, with the fourth meeting place, we ultimately got to Keller, which is Pecan Street in Old Town Keller over in this direction here. And it was on Pecan Street. In fact, there's a church that meets in there now called the Well Church. I know the pastor there. But this situation was the Methodist Church, which is now on Johnson Road, and they had just built their multipurpose building. They hadn't built the worship service yet, but they built the multipurpose building, and that's where the Methodists met. And so they had this building that they were trying to sell, and there was Tarrant County Christian Academy that was trying to buy the building from them, and then we subleased from Tarrant County Christian Academy, all right? So we were there for the calendar year of 1994, and then that Christian school, they kind of, put us in a hard place because they doubled our rent. And I was like, ugh. And we couldn't afford it. I think it was like maybe $750 a month, and then went to $1,500. We couldn't afford that. So we went on the road again. Oh, my word. And so we met at this place for a few weeks. The Roanoke Community Center, which still exists. I think it's been added on to since then. I drove by it a few weeks ago. And I remember this building, a nice, big, large room. Of course, we had to set chairs up again. And so they had this one large storage room where all the chairs and tables were. And so what we would do is clear out that room, and we would use that for the toddler room. And then the entryway is where we had the nursery, right by the front door. I think we brought some bassinets and things like that, and that's where the little babies would be. So we made it work. The Lord was very kind. In fact, the situation that we have in Hazlitt right now is a lot better than this situation. But it continued on. The church started to shrink a little bit. We lost some people when we lost the building. And we went down, I think, maybe like 80s and 90s in terms of attendance and things like that. Because we started off with about 25 families because it was the church split situation. And then a much larger group of people went to other churches as a result of that church split in 1993. So that's the Roanoke Community Center. That's where we met for quite a bit. And then we sunk even lower. We started to meet in this building that still exists in Keller. We moved to the storefront at the corner of 1709 and Navajo Drive, and we shared it with a Pentecostal church. So if two churches were ever more different, it would be Bear Creek Bible Church and the Calvary United Pentecostal Church. And they were the Pentecostal folks who the ladies all had long hair and all wore dresses, so they were very conservative. And they were also very charismatic. They speak in tongues and so on. They would meet at 9 o'clock. They had about maybe 20 people. It was a small group. And then we would meet at 11 o'clock, right? So, but I became pretty good friends with the pastor, Jerry Whitley, and we'd have a lot of good theological discussions and things like that. So we met there for quite some time. There was even one room that they let us use so I could have an office. And that was our 6th meeting place. And today, or at least when this picture was taken a few years ago, it's now a Taekwondo studio. All right. So then we moved across, a few blocks over, and we moved to this building, which actually has some history in Keller, although it was recently torn down. And the Calvary United Pentecostal Church bought this building. And ironically, the church that we came from, that's where this church started. That church started in this building, like in the late 1970s, which is really fascinating, I thought. And so we met in this building for a few months, and then we found out, we got word that there was a building that was available for us to rent that was right across the street, which is Elm Street in Old Town Keller, right across the street from this building. And we found out that there was a church that was going out of business. It was Golden Gate Baptist Church, and that building was originally the First Church of Christ in Keller. And so we found out that this building was going to be for rent because the church had basically disbanded, and the pastor, who was bivocational, said, "Hey, do you want to rent this from us?" So I still remember after a worship service, I think it was in February of 1996, the group, after we finished our worship service in this building, we all went across Elm Street, and I still remember us walking. Do you remember that, Pat? Walking across as a group into this building here, and we thought we had gone into like a cathedral, like a, look at the size of the auditorium. Look, it has classrooms. Look, it has a hallway. Wow, this is amazing. And you mean we could actually rent this place? They're letting us rent it? And what had happened is that, now this is an old building. It was built in 1948. But the year before, the church had spent a bundle of money on renovating it, which is the reason why they disbanded, because they couldn't afford to make the payments on the renovation. So then we got this building that was old, but in decent shape, but it had been renovated. The carpet was really nice. It had new pews. Some of the windows were changed out, drop ceilings, new lights. Really a very nice building. So this is where we really got settled, and we grew a lot here. We tripled in size, more than tripled in size. Did 3 services, and it was an excellent time. So we're now in the 1996 time frame. So 3 months later, what we did was we did an internal bond program. And I still remember the leadership meeting when Harold Landers announced, okay, I think we should do like an internal bond program. Let me explain to you how to do this. And so he had an overhead projector, and we were in Harold and Pat's living room, and he was so excited about this that he actually got on his couch. He stood on his couch to point out all of the different intricacies of this bond program. So it was an internal bond program that we basically put together and managed ourselves, and the building, we paid $190,000 for that baby. All right, $190,000. Today, they're trying to sell it for $900,000 now. I don't know if they're going to get that, but now, fast forward 7 years, we sold it for $400,000 to the Lucas Funeral Home, ironically. All right, isn't that funny? But there's more to tell about this era of the church, which the church was growing, and things were going really well, and they were really good times. And so we continued to grow, and there was a little newspaper article of us changing buildings and so on. And then we had the building dedication. Dr. Troxel, who did our 25th anniversary celebration, he did the ribbon cutting. He dedicated that building right there. And you can see some of the folks who were involved in the leadership at that time. And then we continued to grow, and we did have a few classrooms in that building, which was great, but then we needed more classrooms for Sunday school and for youth events and things. And so this building became available right across the street, right across from Hill Street, the building, and this is the second oldest house in Keller. I think it was built in 1912. Mrs. Roach, who used to be the town historian, lived right across the street, and her daughter lived in the oldest house in Keller, which was built in 1907, I believe it was. And so we had this building that was just renovated, and so that's where we had some adult Sunday school classes in that building, and we purchased it. And then this building right next to it became available too. And we call this the Gray House because it was owned by a man named Jim Gray. And he used to sit out on his front porch there, drinking his beer. And then as I would come to work in the morning, my office was like right across the street from his house. And he would see me, "Hey, John, how you doing? You want a beer?" "Thanks, Jim, I'm trying to cut down, you know." And so then after he passed away, then his family asked, "Did you want to buy the building?" And we said, "You betcha, we do." And so this became our youth building. All right. So we had two buildings across the street from what was the main building. These buildings still exist. I think they're antique shops now of some sort. And then in 1998, I remember we had a leadership retreat, and the conclusion was, we came to the conclusion that we needed to get some more land. And I remember, okay, man, I hope we can get land on 1709, because that's where everything's happening. It's Keller Parkway, you know, or Price Street, as it used to be called. That's where I really want the land. But then we found out that land on 1709 was really expensive. But there was another street south of it called North Tarrant Parkway. And the land there was a lot less expensive because North Tarrant Parkway was just, I forget the name of, anybody remember what North Tarrant Parkway was called? It was just a 2-lane road. Sorry? Yeah, I forget. It's the street, you could still see a remnant of the street, because now it's 6 lanes. Then it was only 2 lanes filled with potholes. Wilson Lane, thank you. So we could get a really good piece of land on Wilson Lane. Yeah, but it's broken down, there's nothing on it. And then we found out from the city developers that one day, North Tarrant Parkway was actually going to have a higher traffic count than 1709. I was like, wow. So an example of one of many examples where God knew exactly what he was doing, even though from our time frame, it didn't sound like a very good idea, but from God's time frame, it was perfect, you know. And so we bought this 10.3 acres with the house on it. You can see the house right over there on the right, which is still our offices. We bought it for $250,000 in Keller, okay? So, and we thought that, oh, can we afford that? But the people who owned it, the Foxes, they wanted a church to be on there. So they said, we will owner finance it, 7% interest, which was a good interest rate back then in 1998, and we will charge you $250,000. And somehow, I don't know how this happened, but we paid it off in 3 years, paid off the land in 3 years. Okay. So then we went to an architect, got things figured out in terms of the best use for the land. There you can see, you know, we have Sarah Brooks over here, and of course these houses to the west and the north hadn't been built yet. And so the architect came up with a building use plan for the 10.3 acres, and we knocked down the garage, okay? And then, of course, we kept the building for our offices. That house was built in 1980, and so it's still serving us, you know, as well as it can as our offices for now. And then we started building in 2003. We started construction in September of 2003 after doing an external bond program. Okay, so this is one of the things at Dallas Seminary. They teach you how to preach the word. They teach you how to do exegesis. They teach you Greek. They teach you Hebrew, church history, the Bible, everything. But they teach you absolutely nothing about real estate, legal issues. So this has all been a tutorial for me and for our church leadership in general, I think, because we just learn stuff. So we did an internal bond program for the Hill Street building, and now what we did was an external bond program. So we hired a bond company to do this, and we raised the $1.9 million. 90% of it in-house. So people took their 401ks and their other investments, and they folded it over and bought church bonds. You bought a church bond for $1,000, and it went from either 6 months maturity or 17 and a half years, I think it was. And so all the short-term bonds, they paid really well too. Interest rates were high then. And so all the new bonds went really fast, and then all the high-interest bonds at the end went really fast. So we had a few in the middle. So 10% of the bonds were sold on the market, and we got fully funded through our external bond program. And so then we were able to build the building that you're sitting in right now. And here's a few shots of construction. There is the east side hallway. That's what that looks like, where our adult classes are right now. And we could write things on the beams. I think I wrote something from Isaiah. And there's the building. This was, I believe, February of 2004. The building was completed in May of 2004. And these are a few pictures of the cross being placed. So you can see the big structure that supports the cross that you see in our building. And the crane, it was really a fun thing to watch, to see the cross being implanted into the top of the church. And there you see a nice photo of the building. If you don't know this, these are supposed to represent praying hands right here. Okay. And then before we got the stained glass windows in 2011, donated by a family in memory of Betty Richart, by the way, the picture explanation of our stained glass is in this entryway here. If you're curious about the details, in memory of Betty Richart, who was a Sunday school teacher and a very faithful family in our church. Her husband did that in memory of her. But before the stained glass windows were put, these speakers up here, it looked like a Bible, an open Bible. So you have praying hands and a Bible. All right. So in May 2004, Bear Creek Bible Church moved into their facility at North Tarrant Parkway, and this was our 9th meeting place. Yes, but just saying that is exhausting. Right? So then we decided, okay, what we need to do I believe it was in December of 2014, when we put together a package explaining what we wanted to do as church leadership for the second phase. And that was ultimately called the Harold and Pat Landers Center for Christian Education, or Phase 2, all right? And we put together that by hearing from the congregation about the requests for different new rooms and so on. And we wanted this hallway to become adult classrooms, which they are now. And so then we had to build new children's classrooms, as well as a bigger area for the youth, because the old youth room used to be the room that now has the playground in it. Okay, so that used to be the old youth room. So we needed to also make our preschool area more secure too, because people could walk in. This hallway over here used to be all open, just like this hallway is over here. So we decided, okay, we really need to get up to speed on security issues, and so that's why we enclosed that hallway over here for our preschool. So here's a few pictures. You know what it looks like, so I'll just go through these pretty quickly. There's a gymnasium, and I never thought we'd have a gymnasium. I think that's pretty cool. So we have a gymnasium, and then we have the new children's classrooms straight on and to your left. And then there's the play set that is in the former youth room. And then we intentionally, put the windows there so that way parents could stand in the fellowship area and chat and keep an eye on their kids. And then we did the kid check system. It's like, oh, that's so cool. We're just like other churches now. We have a kid check system. We're not just doing it with a clipboard. We actually are using computers, which is cool. All right. And then a new kitchen as well. So the old kitchen used to be in the area right behind the kid check section. That was a bigger area. And so the kitchen is not a lot bigger than the old kitchen, but it's a lot better, all right? And so we have the beautiful new kitchen that was put in the center of the building on purpose. That way the children, as well as the youth and the fellowship area, would have access to the kitchen area. And then there's the youth auditorium or student auditorium, and where Kyle does his thing, and is also used by a lot of other ministries in the church too. That's where we have marriage boot camp and men's events and women's events and lots of other things. So Kyle is very generous with letting us use the whole student area. There's the part of the student activity area, and there's the missions room. I wish we made that bigger, because that is the place where we assemble our equipment to do our work in Mexico and other places. There's a lot of storage there for our building supplies. Then there is the second phase under construction. Obviously, the foundation and the roof are being put together. There's an overview of the building, the first phase, with the foundation for the second phase. All right, and I think that's all I've got is pictures, but I have a few things I want to tell you. First of all, there are three things that I think characterize Bear Creek Bible Church. The first thing is that, and I say this not to sound hyper-spiritual or super spiritual, but I really believe that Christ leads this church. And I really believe that because for at least two reasons. First, because frequently I've seen where he takes care of problems before we're even aware of the problem. And I could give you several examples of that. I won't get into it right now. But he takes care of situations like, God, why are you allowing this to happen? And then we realize, well, he was actually taking care of a problem. And we learn that later on. The second reason why I say that Christ leads this church is because we have unusual unity without uniformity in everything. Okay? So we are a church that teaches and believes in grace, but we also practice it. And that's really important. That is absolutely essential, because true transformation and change only takes place in an environment of grace. You cannot back people into a corner for change. You might get a little temporal change out of them, but it has to take place in an environment of grace, which means no backbiting, which also means submitting to one another. And so you can see example after example of people feeling strongly about something, and then they say, okay, well, I'm going to choose to submit to you on this. So we really do that. And I see that happen in our elder board and our staff as well. So first point is that, and I say this after thinking about it a long time and saying it to people individually, I think I can say this to the group, is that Christ really leads this place. The second characteristic is the importance of faith. And of course, it's not so much that we gin up a lot of faith, it's just knowing the object of our faith better. And once you know him, it's not too hard to have a lot of trust in him. The better you know him, you know what I mean? And so it's the importance of faith and rejecting fear. Okay, so I saved this story for this because when we voted to do the second phase, the church budget for the several years before that was not being met. Our giving was meeting our spending, because we never spend 100% of the budget. So it wasn't that we were in crisis. It wasn't that our financial situation was bad, it just was okay. So we were getting enough to meet our bills, but we weren't getting enough to meet our technical budget. So understandably, and in fact, I had a lot of individual conversations where people would point that out. Why are we doing a second phase when our financial situation is not ideal? And I said, that's a really good point. You know, if you don't feel comfortable with it, vote against it. You know, but the leadership believed that it was the right thing to do and that we needed to trust God with it. And so when our financial situation was not bad, but it wasn't great, the congregation voted 80% plus to go ahead with the second phase. That took guts, it took boldness. Now I say that to inoculate us from thinking, wow, the financial picture since 2016 has been really positive, and so we can do more things because we have a lot of money. No. I mean, if you had to choose between having surplus or deficit, I would, of course, choose surplus. I want that. But do not buy into the illusion that our money is what drives things. And so I want us to inoculate that we might be in a precarious or weakened financial situation in the future. That should not cause us to rear back. To learn our lesson from 2014 when things were mediocre financially. We still stepped out in faith. That's one of the biggest lessons that I learned, because I'm a pretty conservative person when it comes to finances. But you have to step out and take faith and risk. It also goes in line with our going to Mexico. I was so proud of our leadership. I never got pushback. We just, we check, make sure everything's safe and reasonably safe, not taking unnecessary risks. But and times are getting bad there again. But I remember in 2011, 2012, it was like, wow, there's a lot of bad stuff going on the border there. But we continued to go. We were one of the few churches, in fact, probably the only church that I knew of who was actually going to Reynosa even during those times. And we were faithful to our friends, and we weren't afraid, and God took care of us. So the importance of faith and trust actually lived out and not just talked about is really important to building up our faith capacity as individual believers. So I hope this is a common experience for all of us, that our faith is increased. In fact, when you're taking risk for God, when you're stepping out in faith, that's actually when you're the safest. If you pull back in fear and you don't take risk and step out in faith for Him, that is a dangerous place. See, it's opposite of what it is in this kingdom. The kingdom of God has different definitions and operating principles than the principles that we find in our world. And frequently, we want to go back to use worldly principles as opposed to principles that are taught to us in Scripture. The third thing I want to tell you is that I'm proud of our church, proud of our leadership, our pastors, our elders, the congregation in general, because frequently, even though we're not a big church, I think that we're frequently fighting above our weight class. And we're doing things that even some bigger churches don't want to do. And so we're doing some unusual things, like the lawsuit, the planting of Hazlitt Bible Church. We're stepping out in faith, trying to make an impact in our world. And then, so when the leadership sets that pace, the beautiful thing, the absolutely attractive, sensational thing that we frequently see is that you guys respond to it. Thank you. Thank you for responding to our desire and call to be faithful and to do things that are big, to do things that are unusual, to do things that are even considered from the operating principles of this world may be risky. Thank you for going against the grain. Thank you for going against the norm. Thank you for not giving us grief. Thank you for giving us your input, because if you got something to say, you need to say it. That's healthy. In my doctoral dissertation, a cult-like church is a church that only has communication from the top to down. A healthy church also should have communication from the bottom up, right? And you guys do that. So all I have to say really is, first, praise God. Thank you for your faithfulness. Thank you for running this place. Thank you for overriding us when that's necessary. And thank you for giving and providing a heartfelt response from the grassroots when we are doing the right thing. So, Anyway, I have 3 minutes left. This is amazing. How did I do this? So does anybody want to say anything? Anybody want to say anything or ask a question, whatever? Paul, did you have your hand up? Yeah. Oh, thanks, Paul. I appreciate it. Yeah. Thanks. You're very kind. Does anybody else have any comment or question they have? Or could we do our presentation for the third phase now? And okay. Well, we're good. All right. Let's close in prayer then. Our gracious Heavenly Father, thank you for this place. And it's not so much the place, it's really the people. I thank you for all the work that you've done in our church's history, the 30 years. Some bad decisions were made, some experiments didn't work, but that's okay. Thank you for giving us a proper understanding of truth and grace, and not allowing one of those principles to cancel the other one out, but to have the personality of Jesus, who is full of grace and truth. And I pray that that personality continues to permeate Bear Creek Bible Church into the future. We pray this all in your Son's name. Amen.